You hear it first, the wet drag of flesh against stone. A sound like flesh scraping across a butcher's block, but slower, deliberate, rhythmic. Look down. There's a naked man tied to a wooden frame, his face pressed into the dirt of a London street. His back is no longer skin. It's raw, open. You can see muscle tissue gleaming red through the torn flesh. In the deepest wounds, there are white bones for miles around. They've dragged him 4 miles like this through the heart of London, and he's still breathing. The crowd lines the streets. Thousands of them, men, women, children, sitting on their father's shoulders to get a better view. They throw things, rotten fruit, stones, animal waste. The objects bounce off exposed muscle off bone. They scream at him, mock him. Some laugh. A vendor walks through the crowd, selling meat pies. No one looks away. It's August 23rd, 1305 at 9 a.m. And what happens next will take 5 hours. 5 hours of choreographed agony. 5 hours where every cut, every breath, every scream was planned in advance by men who had spent years perfecting their craft. Every second was designed not to kill him quickly, but to destroy him completely. Body, legacy, and the very idea he represented. Welcome to Crimson Historians, where we dig into the bloody truths that history tried to bury. We don't sanitize the past here. We don't soften the edges or skip the ugly parts. We show you what really happened. The things your textbooks left out, the things that made people throw up, faint, and question everything they thought they knew about justice. If you're ready for it, if you want history without a filter, hit the subscribe button right now. We're building a community of 100,000 truth seekers, and we need you to get there. Click subscribe. It takes 1 second, and it tells YouTube to show you more content like this. You've seen Braveheart. You think you know this story. You don't. What I'm about to show you doesn't come from Hollywood. It comes from medieval court records, eyewitness accounts written in Latin by monks who were there, forensic analysis of execution methods used for over 500 years. By the end of this, you'll know 3 things that most people never learn. The legal loophole that Edward I exploited to justify what he did. The medical reason Wallace remained conscious for far longer than should have been possible. And the one detail that was so disturbing that even hardened executioners, men who killed for a living, refused to participate. You will also understand why this execution didn't just kill a man. It changed the definition of cruelty in English law. It created a template for state-sanctioned torture that would be used for the next 5 centuries. The last person to suffer this exact punishment died in 1820, over 500 years later. This is the story of how a king tried to destroy a legend and accidentally immortalized it. Before he became the man dragged through the streets of London, before his name had English soldiers checking the shadows, William Wallace was nothing. Born around 1270 in Elderslie, Renfrew, a place so small that most maps don't bother to mark it. His father was Sir Malcolm Wallace, and this is where the movies lied to you. Malcolm wasn't a farmer. He was a small landowner. The family had land, just not much of it. Enough to eat, enough to matter locally, not enough to matter to kings. Young William was educated by his uncle, a priest in Junpace. That detail is important because most men of his class could neither read nor write. Wallace could do both. He spoke Latin, the language of law and church, French, the language of the nobility, English, Scots for languages. Unusual for a person born in his class. For 27 years, his life was unremarkable. The kind of existence that doesn't reach chronicles or songs. He would have died unknown, forgotten. Just another Scottish landowner's son who lived, worked, and disappeared into the silence of history. Then came the English. Edward I called him Long Shaft because he was 6 feet 10 inches tall, a giant in a time when most men barely reached 5 feet 11 inches. He invaded Scotland, declared himself overlord, forced the Scottish nobles to sign an oath of allegiance in what became known as the Rag Rolls. He humiliated them, stripped them, made them crawl. He stole Scotland's coronation stone, the Stone of Destiny, and dragged it back to Westminster as a trophy and displayed it under his throne, so that any Scottish lord who came to pay his respects would see it, would know that their legitimacy now rested under the buttocks of an English king. The Scots began to call the tomb of their exiled king John Balliol the Tablet. Empty coat, a man with a title and no power. Wallace cared nothing for thrones or crowns, or the wounded pride of nobles who bent the knee to save their estates. He cared about a woman. Her name was Marion Braidfield. Some sources say she was his wife. Others say mistress. The chroniclers cannot agree on the relationship, but they do agree on what happened to her. The English sheriff of Lonick, William D. Hees, killed her, murdered her because Wallace had refused to submit to English soldiers, because he had fought back when it tried to take what was his, because he would not bow. What Wallace did next was not strategic, not calculated. It was rage. In the middle of the night in May 1297, Wallace and 30 men attacked Lon, found Heeslig in his bed, and killed him there. Not quickly, not cleanly. Then they burned the English garrison to the ground, slaughtered 240 soldiers. Scotland woke up the next morning with a new problem. England woke up with a nightmare. A man with nothing to lose became Scotland's most dangerous weapon. For months later, on September 11th, 1297, Wallace commanded 3,000 Scots at Stirling Bridge across the narrow bridge. 10,000 English soldiers, heavy cavalry, longbowmen, the most feared army in Europe. Professional killers who had conquered Wales and crushed rebellion after rebellion. Wallace did not have professional soldiers. He had farmers, merchants, men who picked up weapons because they had no choice. And he waited. The English began to cross the bridge. It was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 horsemen to ride on a breastwork. Their commander, the Earl of Surrey, was so sure that he had not even bothered to scout for alternative crossing points. Wallace waited until exactly half the English army had crossed. 10,000 men perfectly divided in 2 by a wooden bridge. Then he attacked and trapped them in the bottleneck. The English on the other side could not help. Those who crossed could not retreat. They were trapped between the Scots and the river. 2 hours later, 5,000 English soldiers were dead. The river ahead ran red for days. Among the dead was Hugh Cressingham, Edward's treasurer in Scotland, a man so hated that after the battle the Scots flayed his body and made belts from the leather. Wallace supposedly wore a strip of Cressingham's hide on his sword belt. The victory was so complete, so humiliating, that the Scottish nobles, the same ones who had bent the knee, who had signed Edward's oaths, appointed Wallace Guardian of Scotland, a citizen born of a minor landowner. William Wallace was given a title that had only gone to lords and gentry, unprecedentedly for a year, and ruled Scotland, not as king, but as guardian protector. Then came Falkirk, July 22nd, 1298. This time Edward himself led the army, 25,000 men, the full weight of English military power. Wallace had perhaps 7,000, mostly infantry, few cavalry, no longbowmen. The English arrows tore through the Scottish formations like cloth. Thousands died in the first hour. Wallace tried to hold the line, tried to turn the tide. He couldn't. The people were a massacre. Wallace's army was shattered, scattered. But here's the thing about Wallace. He didn't surrender, didn't send envoys to negotiate, didn't bend the knee to save his life. He disappeared into the countryside and waged guerrilla warfare for 7 more years. 7 years of ambushes, raids, burning down English supply lines, disappearing into forests and valleys before his soldiers could regroup. 7 years of making Edward Longshanks, the man who crushed Wales, drove every Jew out of England, the man who terrified his own nobles, look like a fool. Edward spent over £100,000 trying to catch him. In modern currency, that's over 80 million pounds. He mobilized armies, built a spy network, offered bounties, imprisoned the families of suspected Wallace sympathizers, and Wallace slipped through his fingers until he didn't. By 1305, Scotland was broken. The majority of the nobility had surrendered again, signed new oaths, accepted English rule in exchange for keeping their lands, their titles, their comfortable lives. They had done the math. Survival beat pride. Wallace never did the math. He was the last one standing, the last man to refuse to call Edward his king, and that made him unbearable. Edward built an intelligence network across Scotland like a spider builds a web. Innkeepers on the English payroll, merchants reporting travelers, clergy passing on information, servants listening at doors, the rolls of the former treasurers, royal financial records preserved in the National Archives, showing payments to informants in Scottish regions. Silver changing hands for whispers about Wallace's location. Edward also made the stakes clear. Anyone caught helping Wallace would die the same way Wallace would die. Hanged, drawn, quartered. Your family would lose everything. Your name would be erased. The pressure was relentless. Wallace's circle of trust collapsed. In 1305, there were perhaps 10 people in all of Scotland who could be trusted. Maybe fewer than that. Every meal could be his last. Every bed could be a trap. One of those 10 trusted men was Sir John de Ment. Scottish knight, seemed loyal, had fought the English, hosted Wallace on his estates. He was not loyal. August 3rd, 1305. Not the 5th, as some sources claim. The 3rd. Wallace was staying at Ralph Day's home in Roston, just outside Glasgow. Meneth knew he would be there. So did Jack Short, Wallace's own servant. So did 2 others, whose names were never recorded. They were deliberately concealed from those who survived. They invited Wallace to dinner. Wine was served. Some chronicles suggest it was a sedative. Not enough to kill, just enough to make him drowsy. Slow his reflexes. They took him while he was sleeping. Imagine that. You close your eyes and what you think is safety among people you have trusted, maybe even loved. You wake to the sound of armor, chains, cold iron closing around your wrists. You look up and see faces you know, men you have eaten with. Men you thought would die before they betrayed you. And you realize that the wine tasted wrong. Meneth received land worth 100 a year. The payment is documented in the English earlier drafts rolls. Blood money, a fortune. Jack Short got less. The 2 unnamed conspirators got enough to disappear. But here's what makes it worse. They didn't just capture Wallace and take him to England. They took him first through Scotland. For 17 days, Wallace was transported south in an iron cage mounted on a cart. They put him on display in Scottish towns. Let the people see their hero bound, broken, no longer dangerous. The journey took 17 days because they deliberately stopped and made a round trip. They wanted every Scot to see him in chains before the English did. They didn't just capture Scotland's hero. They made sure every Scot saw him in chains first. Made sure hope died before the man did. August 22nd, 1305. Evening. Wallace arrived in London. 80,000 people. The largest city he had ever seen. They put him up in William Deer's residence on Fenner Street. 20 armed men stood guard. Not for security, but for ceremony. The chronicles say that Wallace refused food that night and spent hours praying Latin phrases through the door. He asked for a priest. He didn't get one. Morning came. They dressed him in sackcloth, the clothes of a traitor. At 8 o'clock, the procession began. Wallace was riding what they called a poor horse, a fool, a deliberate underdog. Around him were the mayor of London, 2 sheriffs, 6 aldermen, 20 knights, all on war horses, 2.5 miles to Westminster. 90 minutes, thousands lined the streets, throwing rotten food, stones, feces, screaming, calling him a demon, a Scottish dog. Wallace said nothing. Westminster Hall was waiting. 240 feet long, built in 1097 as a monument to Norman power. A wooden platform was 4 feet high at the south end. The seats were full. Nobility who had paid to watch. 5 judges in scarlet robes. Sir Peter Maulery in the middle. As Wallace was dragged up onto the platform, they placed a crown on his head. Oak and laurel leaves twisted into a wreath. The English claimed that Wallace had boasted that he deserved to wear a crown at Westminster. No Scottish source confirms this. It was propaganda, but it worked. The crowd snorted. Maulery rose. Read the charges. Treason, riot, murder without regard to age or sex, robbery, arson, murder at Stirling Bridge, burning of churches, invasion of Northumberland, acting as a guardian without authority. 15 minutes of accusations. When he finished, Wallace spoke first Latin, then English. I could not be a traitor to Edward, for I was never his subject. Under English law, treason meant breaking an oath to his king. Wallace had never sworn allegiance to Edward. He had fought for the rightful king of Scotland, John Balliol, for Scottish independence. Legally, he could not be guilty of treason. Edward knew this, so his lawyers added another charge, that Wallace had tried to make himself king of Scotland. There is no evidence for this claim. None. It was invented to justify the treason charge. The trial lasted less than 30 minutes. Wallace had no right to defend himself. His words were recorded and then dismissed. Maulery pronounced the sentence. You shall be dragged to Smithfield, hanged by the throat, but not until you are dead, cut down while you are alive, your private parts cut off and burned before your eyes, your entrails and heart removed and burned. Then your head was chopped off and your body cut into 4. Your head was displayed on London Bridge. Your quarters were sent to Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth. Hanged, drawn, cut into 4. The first fully documented execution of its kind. It was to become the legal standard for high treason for 500 years. This was not justice. This was revenge wrapped in legal robes. Before we go any further, I have to stop. We are 5 minutes into Wallace's worst day, and I have already shared details you will not find anywhere else. This research took over 40 hours. Medieval chronicles in Latin, court documents, historians specializing in medieval law. If you learned something right here, hit the like button. It takes half a second. Tells YouTube to show this to more people who care about actual history. Here's the reality. 88 of you haven't subscribed. You're here. You're engaged, but you're not helping us grow. Every subscriber counts. Every like passes this on to someone else who needs the truth. If you want more uncomfortable truths, stories, and textbook leaps like this, subscribe to Crimson Historians right now. And if you don't subscribe, tell me why in the comments. What are we missing? I read all the way back to August 23rd, 1305, because what happens next is where the execution falls short. Guards grab Wallace and rip off his clothes in Westminster Hall in front of hundreds of people. They dragged him out to the obstacle, a wooden frame 8 by 4 feet covered in oxhide, the kind used to haul supplies. They threw him face down, tied his arms wide, legs spread, ropes around his wrists and ankles. A wooden beam under his chest. That beam was no mercy. It kept his face from flattening, prevented suffocation, made sure his head hit the cobbles without knocking him unconscious too quickly. 2 draft horses, Bran and Goliath. Westminster to Smithfield, for 0.2 miles through the most populated parts of London. King Street, the Strand, Fleet Street, Ludgate Hill. 2 hours at walking pace. 2 hours face down, naked, dragged over the cobbles. The first 100 yards, skin damage, burns. A quarter of a mile, the outer layer gone, bleeding. A mile, muscle tissue visible. 2 miles, bones visible through the deepest wounds. Your skin has 200 nerve endings per square centimeter. Modern forensic analysis confirms that the victim remains conscious. No serious head trauma, no rapid blood loss, just shock, which does not mean sleep. That means your nerves are on fire. 10 to 15,000 people lined the route through objects, screaming. Some sections went silent, possibly sympathizers, possibly terror. Street vendors followed, selling refreshments, parents lifting children. Educational purposes. Wallace's eyes remained open, lips moved, prayer, witnesses assumed. Behind him, a dark trail of blood and tissue. A monk wrote. His back was ripped to the bone in places, yet he spoke not a word of prayer. 1130 Smithfield, 10 acres, London's execution ground since 1196, scaffold 2.4 meters, high 6 meters, wide gallows and the center tool's visible brazier, glowing, dividing block ropes, chains, knives, 5 to 8,000 people temporary, stands for the wealthy 2p per seat. Wallace was lifted up from behind face, broken nose crushed, eyes swollen shut, teeth missing, still conscious. They dragged him up the scaffold steps, blood on every step. The crowd roared, then silence. The executioner stepped forward, hooded, black robes. John Delton, the chief executioner of London. 3 assistants beside him, the tools laid out where Wallace could see, where the crowd could see. Medieval executions were psychological. They were made to see what was coming. Wallace saw everything. He knew it. So did 8,000 people watching. He had survived the journey. Now came the spectacle. The noose was made of hemp rope, 1.5 inches thick, rough fiber. The executioner placed it around Wallace's neck. The knot went behind his left ear, not his neck, but behind his left ear. That placement compressed the carotid artery and the carotid artery together on one side. It caused asphyxiation, not a broken neck. A broken neck is quick. Asphyxiation is slow. 2 assistants pulled on the rope. Wallace lifted himself 7 inches from the scaffold. Not high enough to break his neck, just high enough to cut off the air. His body fought back. Legs kicked, torso twisted the dance. His face turned red, then purple, then dark purple. Capillaries burst, tongue swelled, turned black. Foam on his lips, eyes bulged, and he was awake. 2 to 3 minutes of drowning in air. The executioner watched, waiting for the precise moment. Too long and Wallace dies. The execution is ruined. Too short and he recovers too quickly. 2.5 minutes. The perfect moment. John Delton earned 20 shillings for this. He was good at his job. The signal came. They cut the rope. Wallace fell 2 feet down onto the scaffold. Hard hit for a moment. Silence, then a violent gasp. His crushed windpipe tried to suck in air like an animal. Wet, choking, blood-stained saliva, body spasms. A monk wrote. He gasped like an animal brought to slaughter, but still alive. They let him recover. 2 minutes, 3, just enough for his brain to register that he was not dead. Then they dragged him to the table. 7 feet long, 3 feet wide, tilted 15 degrees so the crowd could see. Iron shackles at wrists, ankles, waist. A leather strap across his forehead. That strap held his head still, prevented him from looking away because they wanted him to watch. The executioner chose a knife, long, narrow, sharp. He moved between Wallace's legs. What I am about to describe is documented. The first cut came across Wallace's groin. Precise, clean. Blood ran down his thigh. The emasculation was staged, prolonged. First, the testicles were cut off and held up for the crowd. They roared. He threw them into the fire. The smell of burning flesh. Several people vomited. Then the penis was slowly removed. Wallace's screams began here. Roar, primal, one witness wrote. His screams were such that they made men cry who had no reason to love him. 3 to 4 minutes for complete castration. Then the executioner moved to Wallace's stomach, placed the knife at his sternum, and cut straight down. 12 in through skin, fat, muscle. The key was depth. Too deep, he bleeds out. Too shallow, organs can't be extracted. Medieval executioners learned this through years of practice. He parted the wound with both hands, opened Wallace like a book. Inside, intestines, stomach, liver, all visible, pulsating. Wallace's head was strapped down. He could see. He saw his body being opened. The executioner reached in, grabbed hold of the small intestine. 20 feet of it, pulled slowly, about a foot every 10 seconds, 3 to 4 minutes of continuous pulling. The intestines came out in spirals, glistening, dark red. He threw them into the fireproof. The smell, burning intestines, feces, blood, flesh. Vendors sold her bundles to mask it, documented in the city's expense records. Wallace's screams changed. A high-pitched, barely human. Some chronicles say he shouted in Latin, in Manus, "Truis dominant in your hands, sir." Medieval belief. The entrails were the seat of courage. Burning them destroyed the person's will. The executioner reached back in. Stomach, liver, spleen, kidneys. His arms bloody to the elbows. 10 to 15 minutes of exhumation. Modern trauma medicine tells us that consciousness could be preserved for that long. The tilt of the table maintained blood pressure to the brain. Stage d'exhumation prevented rapid bleedings. Shock heightened consciousness. Adrenaline at its peak. Medieval medicine didn't understand it, but they knew it worked. The crowd moved. Initial bloodlust turned to silence. Some left. Parents covered children's eyes. Too late. Women fainted. Soldiers vomited. Public executions were common. But this was extreme even for medieval London. Typical hanging 5 to 10 minutes. Wallace's execution over 90 minutes. Still not done. They had come for justice. Got a horror show that even London couldn't stand. The burning entrails served several purposes. Practically prevented mess. Symbolically destroyed the traitor's inner character. Religious purification by fire. The smoke was visible all over London. The smell carried on the wind. The pyre sat directly in Wallace's field of vision, watching his own organs burn. They erased William Wallace from existence. Body, soul, legacy, or so they thought. Wallace's condition was unclear. Source conflict. Most likely shock-induced semi-consciousness. Eyes rolled back. Shallow breathing. The executioner assessed. The victim was fading. Time to finish. Tool change. Knives for heavy axe. 2.5 kilograms head. 1 meter high shaft. Broad blade ground specifically for this execution. Symbolic change. Surgical precision for brutal finality. They dragged Wallace to the chopping block. Concave wooden top for throw placement. His body was barely responsive. The crowd went completely silent. The executioner raised the axe high. The first blow missed a clean cut. Wallace's neck muscles contracted. His body moved. The executioner's entire body was deeply wounded. Partially severed. Blood spurted. Wallace's body convulsed violently. The crowd gasped. Audible shock at the failed beheading. The executioner's reputation was at stake. 3 seconds later, he swung again. This time successfully. The head separated. Fell forward from the block. Blood spurted from the neck stump. 1 to 1.2 meters high. Arterial. The executioner grabbed the head by the hair. Lifted it high. The ritual words, "Behold, the head of a traitor." He turned to all 4 corners, showing all parts of the crowd. Witnesses claimed that the lips were still moving. Probably muscle spasms, not consciousness. Time of death officially recorded 12:47. The execution began at about 11:30. Total time about 1 hour and 17 minutes. Now came the dismemberment. The body placed on a solid wooden table. Tool change again. Large chopping knife. The assistants took over from the primary executioner. This was butchery, not surgery. Arms removed at the shoulder joints. Required lever force, several blows. Right arm for blows to separate. Left arm, 3 blows. Legs at the hip joints. More difficult, larger bones. Right leg, 6 blows. Left leg, 5 blows. Then the torso split lengthwise down the spine. First cut with axe. Finished with saw. Result: 2 halves assembled body parts, head for limbs. 2 torso halves, 7 pieces, each piece cleaned of excess blood with rags, wrapped in cloth, salted for preservation. By this time, most of the crowd was gone. Only hundreds left. They turned a man into components, parts to be shipped as cargo. The scaffolding was a bloodbath. 5 liters or more. Assistants collected organic ashes from the hearth. Body parts placed in separate barrels. Salt wrapped. Tar salid. Total time on scaffold approximately 2 hours. The audience was mostly gone. The festival atmosphere was over. The remaining spectators were quiet. Some were visibly disturbed. Children were crying despite their parents' intentions to teach them a lesson. Vendors were throwing away unsold food. No one was hungry. Court clerks had recorded all the details for royal records. The execution cost totaled 2,614 pound shillings, 8 perforated in the pipe rolls, executioner's fee, materials, guards' pay, transport costs. Edward wanted accountability. He wanted history to remember exactly what he had done. I have to stop here again, because what you have just heard happened. This is not fiction. This is not an exaggeration. This is documented in several medieval chronicles, court records, eyewitness accounts. I've spent weeks researching this one day in history. Not because I enjoy the horror, but because Wallace's story deserves to be told. Fully, not sanitized. If this video made you feel anything, anger at Edward's cruelty, admiration for Wallace's courage, shock at medieval justice, then you owe it to his memory to hit that like button. Here's what a like does. It tells YouTube's algorithm that this matters. It sends this video to history students, to people researching medieval law, to anyone who needs to understand what resistance actually costs. We're 13 minutes into it. You've invested 13 minutes of your life in this story. It takes 1 second to click like. It takes 2 seconds to subscribe to Crimson Historians. And it ensures that we can continue to do this level of research. Right now, our like-to-view ratio should be at least 10. That means if 10,000 people see this, 1,000 should like it. Let's hit that. Let's hit 15. And if you're still not subscribing, seriously, why? What are we missing? Tell me in the comments. I promise I'll respond. We're trying to build the best history channel on YouTube, and we need your feedback to do that. Okay, Wallace is dead, but his story isn't over, because what Edward did next was even more calculated than the execution itself. Wallace's head got a special treatment. Steam boiling. The head was submerged in boiling water, mixed with bay leaves and salt. 15 to 20 minutes, just long enough to stop decomposition and prevent rot. Then the entire head was dipped in tar, a sticky preservative made from pine tar. A 45 cm long iron spike was driven through the base of the skull. Destination: London Bridge, Southern Gatehouse. Highest point visible from both banks of the River Thames. Date of installation: August 24th, 1305. The next day, Wallace's head joined about 30 other heads already on display there. A gallery of traitors. It remained until the bridge was renovated in the 1390s, possibly 85 years or more. Heads were inspected monthly and replaced if 2 deteriorated. 2 guards were appointed to prevent theft. Sympathizers stealing heads were common enough to require security. The morgues were prepared for their own journeys. Quarter 1 went to Newcastle at time. 5 days by cart displayed at the city gates. Main entrance. Newcastle was a border fortress. The quarter served as a warning to any Scots crossing England. Thousands saw it annually. It remained until 1314, removed after Bannockburn, when Robert the Bruce finally defeated the English. Kvarter 2 gik til Berwick upon Tweed. 6 dages rejse udstille ved Scots gata. Ironian. Berwick var en by, Wallace havde befriet i 1297. Nu ville den vise hans rådnende kød som en advarsel mod befrielse. Kvarter 3. Sterling. Synet af Wallaces største sejr, hvor han ødelagde en engelsk hær og ydmygede Edvards kommandør. Nu ville Sterling vise resterne af dets helt. Kvarter 4. På en anden større skotsk by. Endnu en advarsel. Edvards strategi var klar. Hvert større befolkningscenter i Skotland ville se et stykke af Wallace. En konstant påmindelse om engelsk magt og modstandens nytteløshed. Men her er, hvad Edward ikke forstod. Han havde fejlberegnet. Henrettelsen skulle skræmme Skotland til permanent underkastelse. I stedet gjorde den det modsat. Kvartererne blev pilgrimssteder. Skotter rejste på farlige veje bare for at se resterne af deres hed. Ikke i frægt, i arbeidighed. Engelske vogter rapporterede mystiske ofringer efterladt nær udstillingerne. Blomster og bånd, der dukkede op natten over trods strenge forbud. Wallaces lig gjorde, hvad hans levende tilstedeværelse havde gjort, inspirerede modstand gennem ren og skær stedig eksistens. Inden for få måneder komponerede skotske troubadurer sange om henrettelsen. Og brede klagesange, der forvandlede engelsk grusomhed til skotsk beslutsomhed. Englænderne forsøgte at undertrykke sangene, gjorde det at synge om Wallace til en strafbar forbrydelse, der kun drev dem under jorden, hvor de blev mørkere og mere magtfulde. Selv engelske soldater, der havde været vidne til henrettelsen, begyndte at sprede en anden historie. De havde forventet at se en dæmon dø. I stedet havde de set en mand udholde tortur, der ville knække enhver, men som nægtede at knække. Disse beretninger, visket i barakker og værtshuse, skabte en modfortælling. Wallace, monsteret, blev Wallace mandet. På en eller anden måde mere skræmmende. Den skotske kirke omfavnede ham. Præster, der engang havde opfordret til forsoning med England, prædikede nu prædikener om den martyr døde videre. Træk parallelle mellem Wallaces lidelse og Kristi lidelse. Farlig territory, but the clergy recognized an opportunity. Wallace's death had created a way to unite a fractured nation around shared outrage. Robert the Bruce, who'd previously collaborated with the English, who'd even helped hunt Wallace, was reportedly among those deeply affected. Less than a year later, Bruce raised the standard of rebellion again, this time successfully. When asked what drove him to risk the same fate as Wallace, Bruce allegedly replied he'd rather die like Wallace than live as Edward's slave. The execution meant to end Scottish independence had instead galvanized it. Edward I died in 1307, just 2 years after Wallace's execution died, still fighting Scottish rebels. His life's work of conquering Scotland incomplete. On his deathbed, he reportedly ordered his bones carried with English armies until Scotland was fully subdued. Even in death, Edward couldn't let go, but his son Edward II lacked his father's iron will. The Scottish resistance that Wallace had started in his death had energized with triumph at Bannockburn in 1314. 700 years later, William Wallace's name still echoes. Not because of what he did in life, though that was considerable because of how he died. Edward tried to destroy a man so completely that even his memory would vanish. Instead, he created a legend that outlived the English medieval monarchy itself. The execution that was supposed to terrify became the symbol of why some principles are worth any suffering to defend. Wallace's defiant words at trial still resonate. Legitimate authority requires consent. Sovereignty cannot be imposed by force alone. His broken body proves something Edward never understood. Sometimes martyrdom is victory. The human spirit, even when destroyed, can triumph over tyranny. That's the real story of August 23rd, 1305.